The courtroom is always a place of order, measured words, careful arguments, the weight of justice hanging in the air. But what happened that morning shattered the expected decorum, leaving everyone wide-eyed in disbelief. It began with a smirk. The defense attorney leaned back in his chair, oozing confidence, tapping a pen like he had already won. The prosecutor, meanwhile, shuffled papers, steady but stern, clearly preparing for a line of questioning meant to break through the bravado. The air was heavy with tension, the kind that makes even the most seasoned spectators sit forward in their seats. Then it happened. The prosecutor, voice calm yet razor-sharp, fired off a question that sliced through the noise. The attorney, still smirking, leaned in to respond. He expected to dominate, to humiliate. Instead, what left his lips would become the setup for one of the most unexpected clapbacks in courtroom history. For a moment, the room was silent. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning, the shuffling of a single piece of paper. Then came the response. A sentence so precise, so brutal in its timing that it cracked the attorney's smug mask into pieces. The judge raised an eyebrow. The jury leaned in. Even the bailiff, usually stone-faced and detached, had to glance up. And in that instant, everyone understood. The dynamic in this courtroom had shifted. The person who thought they were in control had just been outmaneuvered in front of everyone. But what made it unforgettable wasn't just the words, it was the reaction. Gasps rippled across the benches. A spectator covered her mouth. A reporter scribbled furiously, almost tearing the page in excitement. And the defense attorney? His smirk collapsed into stunned silence, his eyes darting as if searching for a lifeline that wasn't there. The clapback had landed. The courtroom wasn't just listening, it was witnessing a mic-drop moment of justice. And yet, this was only the beginning. Because what followed next wasn't just a clever exchange of words. It was a battle of wit, pride, and power. A duel that showed how a single moment can tilt the balance of a trial, and why the truth once unleashed can't be put back in a box. But here's the real question. If one clapback could silence an attorney, what came after would leave the entire courtroom reeling, because the story wasn't finished. The silence that followed that clapback lingered longer than anyone expected. Courtrooms are built on rhythm, question, answer, objection, ruling. But in that moment, the rhythm had been shattered. The prosecutor's words didn't just cut through the defense attorney's confidence. They sliced deep enough to rattle the very foundation of his strategy. You could almost see it happen in real time. The attorney's fingers tightened around his pen, his smirk gone, replaced by the kind of forced half-smile people wear when they've been caught off guard. He leaned forward, clearing his throat, searching for a comeback. But every sound he made only confirmed the obvious. He wasn't ready for this. The jury sensed it. Jurors aren't supposed to react outwardly, but the subtle glances, the way one leaned back in his chair while another shifted with a raised eyebrow, those tiny cracks in composure told the story. They had just seen the so-called master of the courtroom stumble. And like any performance, once the mask slips, it's hard to put it back on. The prosecutor didn't press immediately. That was the brilliance. Instead, they let the silence stretch. They leaned back, folded their hands, and simply waited. The weight of patience became a weapon, each second amplifying the humiliation. The attorney's eyes darted toward the judge, then toward the gallery as though searching for an anchor, but none came. Finally, with a strained voice, he tried to pivot. He launched into a long-winded explanation, drowning the courtroom in technicalities and jargon. It was an attempt to bury the sting of that clapback under layers of noise. But it didn't work. Everyone knew what was happening. They were watching a man trying desperately to rebuild his crumbling stage. And then, another blow. The prosecutor cut through his monologue with a calm interjection. "Counselor, are you answering the question or avoiding it?" The room froze, a ripple of gasps. One juror coughed to stifle a laugh. The judge tilted their head ever so slightly, a subtle sign that even they were questioning the rambling defense. And the attorney? He blinked rapidly, his mouth opening, closing, but no words came. This was the unraveling. It's one thing to take a hit in a courtroom. It's another to take it in front of an audience, jurors, spectators, reporters, a judge who controls the flow of justice. Pride is fuel for attorneys, but when pride combusts, it leaves only smoke and silence. Commentary here is important, because what we were seeing wasn't just a clash of words. It was the anatomy of arrogance collapsing. This attorney had built his reputation on confidence, on control, on the ability to intimidate opponents with sharpness and swagger. But what happens when someone calls that bluff? When composure is tested not with fire, but with calm precision? The courtroom becomes a mirror. And on that day, the reflection wasn't flattering. The gallery was alive now. Reporters scribbling furiously, spectators nudging each other, whispering under their breath, wide eyes darting between the combatants. It was no longer just a trial. It was a spectacle, a viral moment in the making. And in the age of cameras and headlines, that matters. The judge, sensing the tension spiraling, finally raised a hand. Order in the court. The gavel tapped once. Silence returned, but it was an uneasy silence, like the pause between thunderclaps. Everyone knew another strike was coming. The prosecutor leaned forward, eyes locked, voice calm but sharp. "Counselor, you may attempt to spin this, but facts don't bend. They stand." And with that, the second round of the battle began. This is where the clash turns into a takedown. The clapback expands, the defense attorney tries to recover but only digs deeper, and the courtroom transforms into a theater of truth versus ego. The attorney inhaled sharply, straightening his posture as if bracing for impact. He knew he had been cornered, and the prosecutor's words still echoed in the air. Facts don't bend. They stand. It was the kind of line that, if clipped and uploaded to the internet, would rack up millions of views in hours. And he knew it. But arrogance is stubborn. Instead of retreating, he tried to double down. He tapped his pen against the table, forcing his voice to steady. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "what my colleague is doing is nothing more than theater. They want to distract you from the weakness of their case with sharp remarks and wordplay. But law is not theater, it's reason." It was a bold attempt. He was trying to flip the script, to turn his embarrassment into an accusation of performance. But the irony was thick. The more he spoke, the more theatrical he became. His gestures grew bigger, his words more exaggerated, his tone sharper. The very performance he accused the prosecutor of giving, he was now delivering. The prosecutor, meanwhile, stayed motionless. No gestures, no interruptions, just a calm, fixed gaze, as though studying a house of cards being built in a storm. That patience, that restraint, it was unnerving. The gallery felt it. The jurors felt it. Even the judge shifted in their seat, sensing that a collapse was inevitable. And then, it happened. The attorney, in his zeal to prove his point, contradicted himself. One sentence, so small it might have slipped by unnoticed in another setting, but here, under the microscope of tension, it rang like a bell. He claimed that a piece of evidence was both irrelevant and the central flaw in the prosecutor's case. Two statements, seconds apart, irreconcilable. The prosecutor pounced, not with volume, not with aggression, but with surgical precision. "So which is it, counselor?" The voice was calm, but the question was a hammer. Irrelevant or central? Gasps, murmurs. A reporter's pen clattered to the floor. The attorney froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came. He stammered, repeating fragments of sentences like a man trying to piece together a puzzle that no longer had all the pieces. He looked to the judge, then to the jury, then back to his notes. But nothing rescued him. The jury's faces said it all. One leaned forward, eyebrows raised. Another tilted their head, lips pursed in thought. A third simply shook their head. They had caught it. They had seen the contradiction. And once you see a crack, you cannot unsee it. The prosecutor leaned back again, folding their hands. No need to press further. The silence, once again, was enough. It was as if the clapback from earlier had set the stage, and now the contradictions were writing themselves. Narration matters here, because this wasn't just a clash of two lawyers. This was a moment that revealed a truth audiences love to see. Arrogance undone not by rage, but by logic. The calm dismantling of bluster is a kind of justice people crave. It reminds us that words, when wielded with clarity, are more powerful than theatrics. The attorney, desperate now, turned combative. "Objection, Your Honor. This is argumentative," he snapped. His voice cracked slightly, betraying his frustration. The judge's eyes narrowed. "Overruled." The gavel didn't slam, but it might as well have been thunder. The soundless authority of that word, overruled, landed with the finality of a verdict. The gallery buzzed, whispers spilling out despite the judge's earlier warnings. People nudged one another, wide-eyed, mouths open. They weren't just watching a trial. They were watching pride unravel in real time. And then came the final strike of the round. The prosecutor leaned forward once more, voice steady, each word deliberate. "The truth doesn't need volume, counselor. It doesn't need theatrics. It only needs to be heard once." The words hit like a closing argument, like a moral delivered at the height of drama. The gallery went silent, not out of restraint, but out of awe. The attorney sank back into his chair, his pen motionless now, his eyes fixed on the table before him. That was the moment. The clapback had turned into a collapse. And yet, the story wasn't over. Because what happened after this exchange would ripple far beyond the walls of that courtroom. The silence stretched, long enough to sting, long enough to leave the defense attorney visibly shrinking in his seat. He shuffled his papers, but everyone in the room knew he was only trying to create a distraction, some sound, any sound, to drown out the echo of what had just happened. But echoes like that don't die quickly. They linger. They grow. The prosecutor didn't say another word. They didn't need to. Their last line. "The truth doesn't need volume, counselor. It doesn't need theatrics. It only needs to be heard once," hung like smoke over the courtroom. Nobody dared to interrupt it. Not the defense, not the gallery, not even the judge. And then the gavel struck. "Order in the court," the judge said, though even their voice carried a note of restraint, as if acknowledging that something extraordinary had just unfolded. It wasn't just another exchange between lawyers. It was a moment destined for replay. From the gallery, the whispers returned, louder this time. A young intern leaned toward her colleague, wide-eyed. "Did that just happen?" Another spectator scribbled furiously in a notebook, the kind of notes that become tomorrow's headlines. The defense attorney's face told its own story. Anger, embarrassment, a brief flash of disbelief. He had walked into the courtroom that morning confident, too confident. He had believed his reputation, his theatrics, his sheer presence would carry the day. But reputation can't protect you from precision. Theatrics can't survive when truth slices clean through. And presence? It evaporates the moment silence exposes weakness. The jury, meanwhile, shifted subtly. They weren't supposed to show bias, but humans are humans. A raised eyebrow here, a slight smirk there. It was clear they had absorbed the clapback and its devastating effect. For them, this wasn't just legal wrangling. It was a demonstration of credibility. Who commanded their trust, who respected their intelligence, and who had underestimated them. Outside the courtroom, news was already leaking. Reporters dashed to the hallways, phones buzzing, texts flying out. "You won't believe what just went down in court." Some typed in shorthand, others in all caps, but the message was the same. A lawyer had been publicly, brutally, but elegantly dismantled. And soon enough the clips surfaced. Court proceedings had cameras, and someone was quick, very quick, to isolate the moment. The defense attorney's contradiction, the prosecutor's calm interjection, the crushing one-liner that sealed it. Within minutes it was on social media. Within an hour, it had gone viral. Comment sections exploded. "This prosecutor deserves their own Netflix series. The way the defense just folded, OMG. That's how you destroy arrogance. With facts, not shouting." Some turned it into memes. Others set it to dramatic music. Hashtags began to trend. What had been a courtroom clash was now a cultural event. And here's where we step back and reflect. Because this is bigger than one exchange, bigger than one case. Why does a moment like this resonate so deeply? Because people are tired of arrogance. They're tired of watching those in power, Whether lawyers, politicians, or public figures talk over truth with bluster. They're tired of noise drowning out logic. And when they see it reversed, when calm, steady clarity crushes theatrics, it feels like justice. Not just legal justice, but social justice. A reminder that words have weight. That truth, even spoken softly, carries louder than any performance. Back in the courtroom, the trial continued. Of course it did. Trials are long, complicated affairs, and no single moment, no matter how viral, determines the outcome. But still, the energy had shifted. The defense attorney, once commanding, now chose his words with nervous care. Every sentence was weighed, every claim double-checked, as if he knew another slip could end in another devastating clapback. The prosecutor, meanwhile, didn't gloat. They didn't need to. Their demeanor was the same, steady, focused, calm. It was almost more intimidating that way, as if to say, that wasn't luck. That's how I operate. And the judge? The judge carried on, but not without a faint knowing look. They had seen thousands of cases, thousands of arguments, but they too understood. This moment would not be forgotten. By the end of the day, the courtroom emptied, but the conversation had just begun. People on the courthouse steps debated it. Cafes nearby buzzed with talk. Online, millions replayed the clip, dissected it, admired it. Some even learned from it. Law students sharing it in group chats, communication coaches analyzing it, everyday people using it as a reminder of why listening and striking at the right moment matters. That's what makes a clapback powerful. Not just the sting in the moment, but the lesson it leaves behind. So as we close this story, let's return to the gallery, the people who witnessed it firsthand. Imagine sitting there, watching arrogance unravel, watching confidence collapse, watching truth land like a mic drop. Imagine leaving that courtroom and telling your friends later, "You won to believe what I saw today." And now here's the reflection for all of us. In a world overflowing with noise, maybe the strongest voices aren't the loudest ones. Maybe the real strength lies in patience, precision, and timing. Maybe the truth doesn't need to shout, because when it's spoken clearly, it echoes on its own. And if this story proves anything, it's that sometimes, all it takes is one clapback to change everything. So the next time you hear someone drown out logic with theatrics, remember this moment. Remember the silence that followed. And remember how quickly arrogance can crumble when the truth finally steps forward. Because in the end, it's not about who talks the loudest. It's about who says the one line that leaves everyone wide-eyed.